Okay, my name is Armand Musey from Summit Ridge Group. I just moderated the evaluation panel at our webinar.
And I'm Coleman, Bazelon from the Brattle Group, and I was moderated.
That's a pretty lively discussion there. I had a pretty huge range of views. What do you think the biggest takeaway from the panel was?
Well, the message I was hoping that got across, given that this was targeted to broadcasters as our audience, is that this auction, though somewhat mysterious and complicated, as we saw in the earlier panels, that there's potentially quite a bit of value for most broadcasters, enough that they owe themselves to be able to look into it further as to how they might participate.
I was surprised. That was probably the biggest point of unanimity on the panel. And it's interesting that many of the broadcasters appear to be concerned about the auction process, about how they would be hurt by it. But it really does seem that everyone agreed that there was more upside than downside.
I think that's absolutely right. Those of us who have advocated for an incentive auction all along have believed that there's quite a lot of value, quite large gains from trade to be had here. That leaves a lot of money available to broadcasters. The SEC seems to be going down a path where the broadcasters will get, I think, by any measure, a more than fair share of the value created from this reallocation, and they should be very happy with it.
The other thing that struck me between our panel and one prior was the complexity of the process, particularly understanding the value of any particular broadcaster, and not only their value to themselves, but also the value of that license to the FCC and how it impacts adjacent markets.
They're all interconnected because the signals overlap. There's reasons why in neighboring cities you don't have stations on the same channel, and in fact, our repacking analysis sort of, at one point we asked the question, just how interconnected is the country? And it turns out that everything east of the Rockies is interconnected. So literally, a Miami station can affect what's happening, in Iowa. Potentially, the reality of the auction might not make a series in Miami make it all the way to the Midwest, but they're potentially interconnected. And again, on the west of the Rockies, the entire West Coast is interconnected through overlapping signals.
And so, bottom line, I guess, is that we've decided that there's enormous upside for broadcasters, potentially, but it's a very complex process that they need to spend a lot of time and effort and understand the position of their station in the context of the entire process.
Can you guys get to a dollar amount? I heard $32 billion. Was that a low side, a high side?
If on the what will be bid will be dependent on how constrained market is. That gets affected by what the broadcasters will be paid will be affected by how constrained the market is. That's not only the other stations in the market, but for example, if you're in the border state, the Mexican and Canadian restrictions can play in. One thing that's important to keep in mind is that the value to the broadcaster in a given market is not tied to the spectrum value in that market. This is a sort of national balancing of costs and benefits. So it could be that the spectrum in Seattle will get paid more, the broadcasters will get paid more than is raised in the Seattle market, but by freeing up Seattle, you're able to make a national footprint that's worth much more. My back of the envelope numbers suggest that if we cleared 120 megahertz, and there's 300 million people in the U.S., and cell phone companies paid $1 megahertz pop, that would be $36 billion, and I think that's a very reasonable number. It's a lot less than Spectrum goes for today.
I think at one point there was a number that came out of the panel that the value of the spectrum to the broadcasters that would be taken away in the auction might be worth $3 or $4 billion, and someone thought that the FCC can easily justify paying $15 billion for that at the end of the day.
So where that number comes from is in my repacking model to prioritize bidders to decide which ones would get bought out. You have to make an estimate of what they would bid, and I use a metric, a multiple of station revenues from a couple of years ago. My multiple is a little bit under 2. One of the key points is that, and that analysis showed that if you played that out, you could clear 120 megahertz, and then you'd end up paying about $15 billion to broadcasters. But if you looked at just some of the bids of the broadcasters, would clear to be about $3.5 billion. But I think one of the key points is, and Mark agreed with us on this, was if the multiple's 3 instead of 2 or 4, it'll change the outcome a little bit, but not that much. A few stations will get bought out, some stations will get paid a little bit more, but at the end of the day, there's still quite enough money to pay out the broadcasters.
In line with that, another item that came out of the panel was that a number of private investors are coming into the market and buying some of the smaller stations and markets. The FCC is likely going to need to buy back spectrum. And apparently now they're paying approximately 40 to 50% more than historical norms for some of those smaller stations. Those investors expect that they'll be able to make a significant return even after paying that premium by selling back to the FCC in the auction process. And that really surprised me that prices are being bid up to that extent, but that's in line with an expectation that the payouts for these broadcasters are going to be significantly higher than...
So if you line up, and I've done this in my 2001 paper that's going to be available for this webinar, if you line up the value just by revenue, the revenue of stations in the market, it's a very steep curve. So there's always a lot of stations with low revenue. There's a couple of stations with high, and then a steep curve. So in essence, what's happening is recognizing that the low revenue stations will get bought out at a higher price. The investors are coming in and paying some portion of that up front for the opportunity to bid the auction and capture the larger value. It's not a surprise what the increase in station values based on this has been. I think would vary market by market and a lot on the expectations of the investor and how the rules are going to play out and how successful this is going to be ultimately.
Thank you both.
Probably the final thing is that still some of the critical rules have not been determined, and there's an opportunity for people to influence that by being involved in the rulemaking process, by submitting comments, and through other mechanisms.
The two key things to look out for as a broadcaster in that process, one is you need to talk to somebody who understands the notice to understand the subtleties of the rules and how small tweaks might or might not affect you in your given situation. The other thing that all of us can look toward is whether or not the auction process is understandable and simple enough that everybody will want to participate. That's probably more important than the tweaking the rules.
Thank you.
Thank you.